Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming here to the cosy parlour at Sketch this evening, out of the cold, the bitter cold out there. My name's Max Fraser. I'm co-curated this season of talks here in the parlour at Sketch. The season is called Creative Talks. It's purely coincidence, I should point out, that the whole season comprises of women. This is the third session that we have. I'm very pleased to welcome Ilse Crawford, who's joined us this evening, with her compadre, Morgwn Rimel. She just told me, God, memory of the slip. This talk series is put together in a pretty straightforward way. What we do is we decide on there's a thread of designers running through the series. We choose the designer, and then we hand over to them to decide who they'd like to be on stage with. So, in this instance, we approached Ilse Crawford to join us. Ilse runs a studio called Studio Ilse, a very successful studio here in London, working on all sorts of design for products and interiors, and so on. They'll be talking about that this evening. Ilse chose somebody who she feels she has something in common with, and that is Morgwn, who is the director of the School of Life, also here in London. The thing they have in common, and they will expand upon this, is well-being. The School of Life programs a whole lot of talks and has an amazing centre here in London, looking at how we can enhance our lives through a whole array of media. And Ilse, of course, is working on homes and interiors, where well-being is absolutely central to that. The two of them are going to talk with each other this evening. It's a very casual affair. It's actually a conversation, but they've encouraged me to say to you that it's a conversation with the room. So if at any point you want to butt in and ask a question or suggest something, please do. We're going to run for approximately half an hour, 45 minutes to see where it goes. Enjoy the next 30 minutes, 40 minutes with these two. Over to you both. Thank you.
So, how to start a conversation in such a sort of artificial context? Sometimes we're asked, at the studio, so, what is it that drives the studio's work? Ilse, what is it that gets you up in the morning? And it's people. It's pretty straightforward, really. What I am fascinated by is how buildings and design can affect us as people. Our starting point on any project, whether it's for IKEA or whether it's for something with a more lavish budget, like Cathay Pacific, where we've done the strategy for the lounges, it's always people. We start there. We think about the use of things, we think about the way they affect people. And while obviously things have to be built, they have to address practical things, whether it's IKEA, where you have to address their system, their scientific system, or Cathay, where you're having to address the fact that it never closes and 2,000 people a day go through their lounges. What we are interested in is people. So with Cathay, our starting point was simply, they look tired. Blindingly obvious, but not something that's ever really factored into their design. It tended to be more about the sort of lavishness of, first class, business class, semicircle of spirits on the bar, enormous buffet under heat lamps, all the stuff that actually nobody really cares about. And with IKEA, it was really how to upgrade what is actually an amazing system through the senses, how to make something that really touched you and had the integrity of natural materials, and how to in some way integrate that with IKEA, because I think the 6 inches around you, the 10 centimetres around you are what connects us to our immediate surroundings. Morgwn, I think the School of Life has a very different, but in a way similar, upside down approach to philosophical ideas.
And also, I guess we're also completely fascinated with and focused on people, as are you. So where you're looking at how the environment that you create and design can influence mind and mood and physical presence and their level of kind of comfort and anxiety, we're looking more at interior landscape and a different kind of interior design, I suppose. So looking at the world of ideas and how that influences people's emotional state, mental state, emotional sense of well-being. And we're trying to create spaces where people can think clearly with a limited amount of confusion, distraction, with a maximum amount of connection, support, safety, to help them get to a place where they can understand themselves at a deeper level, and can therefore go out into the world around them with greater confidence, sense of self-esteem, and sort of connectedness to the world and other people around them. So in a way, we work from the inside out, and you guys work from the outside in, which I think is why we've always had so much to kind of chat about and have been really interested in each other's worlds.
I think as well, both of us have from time to time found ourselves in a system which is constructed in a very different way. I very often find myself in meetings with clients, architects, project managers, trying to explain why it's very important to think about how a building is used and who will use it and how they will feel when they use it at the beginning, rather than adding it at the end. Because I think we've created a world which is really driven by the measurables, the way that the process of building is carried out is that you start with the Excel sheet, essentially. It's all about numbers and time and hurry up, we're late, and then you come on board as the interior designer. And sometimes you're confronted by a building that's all but designed. And at that point, we're very often the ones to sort of say, well, look, hang on a minute, how is it going to be used? How are they going to occupy this space? What will they do? Who are these people? And it throws up all sorts of questions, which, had they been asked at the beginning, would have resulted in a very different and, in my view, much more inhabitable space. But it's very largely a problem of the process.
In our case, I suppose, when we're talking about measurables and immeasurables, it's about the difference between hard and soft skills, and the idea that there are certain skills which have a tangible kind of monetary sort of financial value to them, like in terms of your productivity, your output, your ability to generate capital, revenue, whatever. So being an accountant, having certain professional skills. And what we're starting to see is a shift now, and what we really advocate for is a shift towards developing the soft skills within an organization, within individuals, so their ability to empathize with other people, to know themselves, to understand their own internal kind of dialogue. Things like confidence, like how to work with other people, to collaborate, to cooperate, to be leaders, to enable, to coach, to model for other people. All of these things which are this sort of intangible glue that actually make organizations and individuals properly flourish and do amazing things. But in an environment which doesn't support that, you might have like an amazing turnover, but you'll be literally crushing your people to death and burning through people. And if you have an attitude in your own personal life, which is all about achieve, 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 without any sense of self-care or ability to kind of put things in a broader perspective, connect with nature, cultivate your relationships with partners, families, children, whatever. There's a lack of meaning and a fragmentation that comes from that, which causes a huge amount of stress and like literal disease, mental and physical. And so I suppose that's what we're in the business of kind of looking at, is how we can really help people to understand the value and the importance of those immeasurable, sort of invisible, kind of immaterial things, where it's not just about how much money do you have, what is your status, how much power do you wield, And that's something that, I don't know if you've seen a kind of shift in, I don't know, design thinking since like post-financial crisis, but certainly for us it was less about kind of flashiness and ostentation, and a different sense of value started to kind of come to the fore, where people were looking for a deeper sense of meaning and purpose and fulfillment and connection, which wasn't just about kind of keeping up with the Joneses or getting ahead of other people, or a material sense of success and well-being. I don't know if you guys have sort of seen a shift in your own practice, away from statement and more about the emotional experience.
Sometimes, I would say. I mean, sometimes people come through the door and it's clear they are so not on that agenda. You know, they'll sort of talk the buzzwords like, oh, well, we're doing a project and it's all about community, and by the way, can we have your concept in 3 weeks' time? Yeah, not really. But on the other hand, we've had some really extraordinary relationships recently with people who are really trying to work out how to make their spaces support their staff and really make the working conditions not only just good for their staff, but have integrity around what they're trying to do, make life better for them and the people coming through. And, sometimes that starts off as a fairly sort of, simple idea, like, please make it like Google. But at least they're open, partly because of, I think, what's obviously happened in the startup virtual world. More conservative companies are realising that actually bricks and mortar have a huge effect, more today probably than ever before, because they really are valuable only for their emotional effect, I would say. The way they support people, the tangible messages they give. You can't overlook that today, or at least you do it at your peril. Social media finds you out pretty quickly. So I think, going back to the beginning really, I think the immeasurables in building are more important than ever. And they're the things that you will never see on an Excel sheet. I mean, find me the line that says interesting, warm, beautiful, meaningful, integrity. I mean, it's not there. So it's a real struggle to push those through a process which just doesn't even acknowledge their existence.
And I suppose the other thing in our kind of space, for those of you who don't know, the School of Life is a kind of a new sort of cultural institution that is devoted to the development of emotional intelligence. And so what we do is we take ideas kind of out of the ivory tower and bring them to the high street. And the purpose of the space that we create is to bring people together around ideas, broadly kind of speaking, that come from the humanities, so looking at philosophy, psychology, visual arts, literature, and kind of mining those disciplines for the best insights about how to live a good life. And usually when people kind of come across that kind of thinking or those insights, it's presented in a very academic, very esoteric, and really, quite frankly, inaccessible and pretty much irrelevant way. It's sort of like Plato, Aristotle, but like very heavy and hard to understand, or just doesn't feel connected to your day-to-day concerns. And so the School of Life is basically saying, there are people who lived 2,000 years ago who basically worked out what it was to live well. And those insights have endured and have relevance to modern life. And the key is to look at how to frame things in a way that will engage with us now. So we always ask questions that sound a lot more like self-help and a lot less like academic questions. So more like, how can I find a job that I love? How can I get along with my parents? Are relationships meant to last a lifetime, or should we be questioning whether marriage is, the right thing in this day and age? So it sounds a lot more like self-help, but it's backed up with, 2,000 or 3,000 years of enduring human insight. And for us, where you're very much a disruptor in the design space and asking kind of soft questions around hard engineering and kind of hard architectural sort of problems, we're coming up against quite rigid, dull, in some cases, institutional complexes who have very sort of set ways about and sort of views on education and how people learn. And for us, it's about making it much more about just the business of everyday living. And our whole kind of purpose and job on this planet is to learn how to live well. It's not anything kind of more grand than that. It's about how do we get along, better with the people around us, make a contribution to the world that is, significant, even if humble or modest, and what can we do to learn more about ourselves. And it's been interesting to see how much kickback there's been to that, because it's like, oh, that sounds a little bit different, but at the same time, how warmly and widely we've been embraced. And I'm sure that that's something that you guys have experienced in the studio as well, as how you find these pockets of kind of like-minded people all around the world who are really kind of taken with that vision, because there's something that you can just kind of instinctively connect with, the sense of well-being and just wanting to find a greater sense of purpose and meaning in your life.
And I think, while obviously we are constantly wanting to refresh ourselves and revitalise what we do, so much of who we are hasn't changed for thousands of years. We kiss, we sleep, we bathe. Many of the things that bring us together are the same as they've always been. People group together around a table. There are so much of what we do hasn't changed for millennia. And it's the same across cultures, and the same for rich and poor. We thought long and hard about the IKEA range and really wanted it to be something that obviously reached the many people. That's the whole point of working with them. And that meant globally, across different ages, across different cultures. And we really tried to think about the things that we would use ourselves. And when I say we, I mean really everybody from the intern through to the financial director, an age span of probably 40 years. So we wanted to really make sure that they had a universal appeal. But at the same time, the first thing we do whenever we have any client, however deep their pockets, is to ask them very basic questions about what matters to them, what their issues are. And the answers are often super surprising. We had one very wealthy client, and we asked him what the favourite space was in his house, and he said the shower. And another guy basically said the only thing he wanted in his house was to be able to make his own cup of tea. We're pretty banal on one level, but obviously how you translate that can be many different things. But I think if you don't ask those basic questions, because although we are banal, we do all have our differences, different stories, different different histories. For me, building is always a backdrop for people. And so if you don't understand what people need, what matters to them, I don't really understand how you can build for them.
And then I think the tricky thing is people don't often know what they need because they're confused by what they want. And that's kind of where the School of Life comes in, is we live in a culture which is incredibly noisy, incredibly distracting, where most people are hyperactive in the sense that we are obsessed with getting stuff done. We're too busy and kind of proud to wear that as a badge of honor to some extent. And we're faced with a huge array of choices, which makes it very, very difficult for us to actually be attuned to our real needs. I mean, so much of what we're surrounded with is sort of artificial needs cultivated by an advertising industry and a kind of consumer culture, which is sort of manufacturing things that we supposedly need but don't really, really, really need. And so part of what we do at the School of Life is kind of present or kind of create a space for people to kind of think without that distraction, without that noise, on very simple questions. They're not complicated questions, just very, as you were saying, basic questions, where you can just sort of sit with that and get to know yourself a little bit better and have conversations with other people about what they're experiencing, find common ground, realize
because you do, I mean, you get down to basics, don't you? Like how to have a conversation.
Yeah, literally, like we have a class which is how to have better conversations, which sounds like, well, shouldn't that be easy? But actually it's really, really difficult for people to actually get to the point where you're talking about something that really matters. Like where it's not like, oh, what did you do at the weekend? Or, oh, so-and-so, it like just goes to gossip or chatting about, work or whatever it is. But to actually get to the point where you're sharing your true self with someone else. It sounds really cheesy, and I always feel a bit naff kind of describing it, but
it's true.
It's really essential stuff.
And I think designers should be trained to do that.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, yes, we train them in their design skills, but actually, surely an enormous part of a design education should be how to communicate, how to build trust, how to listen. I always say to our team, you've got 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth, and you should use them in that proportion. It's so much about watching and listening, and then translating. I mean, nobody says you shouldn't be a designer, but not without the evidence.
Well, design is a lot about empathy, isn't it? And basically, the best way to get to know yourself is by learning to understand other people. So by listening, by speaking, by observing, and finding things in other people's life experience that resonate with your own, and which kind of act as a mirror or sort of reflect back to you. So it's very, very hard to get to know yourself and to have deep insight in complete isolation. Yes, you can meditate and go on a Zen retreat, and I've done those things, and they've been amazing, and they are transformational. But you can't have that without the connection and the kind of deep insight that comes through dialogue with other people's and shared kind of life experience.
And I think it does go back to education, which again I think is something that joins the two of us. I'm fascinated by. I teach in the Netherlands, which is a country that definitely believes in being clear, outspoken, and not particularly diplomatic, but I like that. I think it is really coaching people to say what they mean and to be clear. That's somehow where it comes from.
Which is actually an incredibly difficult thing. We just did a talk with a woman called Brené Brown, who, I don't know if you guys have heard her TED Talk, but it's like one of the highest kind of rated TED Talks, I think, ever. Like it might be number 2 or something like that. And what strikes you when you kind of meet her as a person and when you see her on stage is she is just completely, utterly herself. There is not any kind of pretense or sort of false mask or persona or anything going on, but it's something that you very rarely come across, particularly in a public kind of with a public persona, and that takes a great deal of courage to actually be able to be that open and in a way vulnerable with people that you don't know. It takes a great deal of trust, and she talks a lot about those things and the importance of kind of courage and how we live in a kind of time where courage is something that we really need to actively kind of cultivate, but mostly because we live in very complex, very challenging, fast-moving times where we're forced to kind of perform, but where we will consistently, if we take risks, which we need to, fail, which means we'll be having to pull ourselves up quite a lot. And that kind of resilience is something that we need to really learn to develop. And that's part of what we do at the school, and I think part of what you're able to create with the spaces that you guys design is that they're sort of self-supporting. They kind of help pick people up in a way to support them and kind of help them recover. Do you know what I mean? To sort of recharge and...
When we think a lot about how spaces can give you self-worth rather than deplete it, and it sounds obvious, but I'm sure you've all been in spaces that make you feel less than human. One of my students actually did an amazing project where she did a manual, forensically photographed, of all those small details in public space that make them institutional and, frankly, miserable. And it's about the details. It's really thinking about space as something that should enhance our humanity rather than not caring about it. We can be brutalized by our environments. I mean, all the evidence suggests that cities that are designed thoughtlessly, basically without any sort of vision, are extremely bad for us, whereas, we all know the stats around Copenhagen and the livable city and the effect that it has on people. It's powerful, I think, when design is part of not just urban planning, but buildings right down to the smallest detail. I think it makes a massive difference. But part of that is accepting that people are a part of your building. They are what will make that building live, and so should be considered, prioritised from the very beginning.
But also I think it's about giving beauty, treating beauty as a very serious kind of KPI, that is something that is worth really going for. It's something we look a lot to kind of religion. We're not a religious organization, we're a secular organization, but we believe that you can learn a lot from the way that religion sort of delivered ideas in a very artful and creative and often very beautiful way. So if you look at Catholicism, for example, regardless of how you feel about its dogma, they created amazing cathedrals, stained glass windows, incredible artwork. All of this was because they understood that beauty was a way to basically embed wisdom and to inspire people and to influence mood and to help raise people up. And I think that's something that we should take more seriously when we are looking at the design of cities and the environment. It matters that the space is beautiful and that it makes people feel good. Because, as you say, the effects or the results of not doing that are catastrophic. They're horrible. I used to live in Tokyo, and on the one hand, you have some of the most beautiful architecture and some of the most amazing gardens and landscapes and things that you could possibly imagine. And on the other hand, you have some of the most horrifying, high-density, kind of prison cell-like housing, which is just bad for your brain and your mental health. And then London is a very interesting kind of patchwork, isn't it, of old and new and beautiful and ugly. I don't know, and you can feel, my mood changes from street to street here sometimes.
And they say, for example, with cancer patients, that actually at the point where they're moved from hospitals, which are obviously designed around caring for your organs, but not really around your persona, to hospices, which are really around your humanity, people live longer. Obviously, environment has a huge effect on us.
And also connection to nature too. So it's even, to your point around the cancer patients, having plants in the room actually makes a huge difference to people's recovery. Having a physical connection to nature of some sort, and that's what, particularly in the design of cities, green spaces, but not just sort of public green spaces, but intimate, wild green spaces is so critical. And why actually we're quite fortunate, I think, in London to have places like the Heath or the Parkland Walk, or that are still a little bit wild, and there is room to have a bit of discovery, and so many sort of hidden, secret little parks and spaces here, which is wonderful.
And again, it comes back to prioritizing the so-called soft values. Feeling at home is a massively important part of our sanity. To feel vulnerable, to feel lost, to feel alienated. They're some of the worst possible feelings psychologically you can have, and yet we don't prioritize the design of feeling at home, either systemically or in design.
And we don't actually equip people through the education system to learn how to develop those emotional reserves themselves. So that's why places like the School of Life exist, to start, I guess, to make a dent in that, to sort of help people work out how to answer those questions for themselves. And why, for example, we're very big proponents of psychotherapy, and psychoanalysis is another discipline that we kind of weave through our curriculum, because it's basically learning how to self-soothe and to be able to analyze yourself, work out, okay, is that a useful emotion? Am I just responding? Is this how I really feel? Is this what I really need? That process of being able to filter through all of the noise and get down to what really matters, and just helping people to develop those skills.
I'm going to jump in as you asked at this stage. If anyone else wants to, please do. Ilse, I've got a question for both of you. Ilse, you talk about the details as being a very important part, and something that your insights, you take those insights to your clients, but how do you incorporate them into your own existence? So let's take, for example, your office. What are some of the details? And they could be minutiae details that have made the space what it is. While Ilse is answering that question, may I just ask you to think about this. Is there anything that you've introduced to the School of Life that you would deem as a mistake, or indeed has anything surprised you in a way that you didn't predict?
Okay.
So, the studio. I don't think a studio is your home, but I think it is your life. So, you know, it doesn't need to feel bad. So we actively have made a space that has, for example, a great kitchen. It's, you know, really in the best space in the studio, where we cook lunch daily, but also once a week we have lunch cooked for us. Once a week, not because I'm stingy, but because I thought about it and thought, hang on a minute, if I do it every day they'll feel obliged, but if you do it once it feels special. And it kind of sets the bar so that actually they have to keep up to it. So it's been interesting, but everybody turns up for lunch. We also have cake on Fridays, which is the only meeting that everybody's on time for. So that is a fundamental to the studio, because it's something that keeps us together, and it means that we can still talk to each other. You know, we don't have to have a meeting to have a conversation. It means we have normal conversations around the table on a regular basis. So that's fundamental. It probably won't surprise you that materiality is something I really care about in the studio as well as in our work. So we've really chosen good, robust materials. We didn't have a limitless budget, of course, but nonetheless, the choices we've made, I think, are ones that are good to touch on a daily basis. So we have wooden desks, for example. We have nice wooden floorboards, good lighting. It took me 2 years to find the place, so, you know, I'm picky. But it's because it's where we produce the work for other people, so therefore it had to be consistent. And you can't ask a team to make human-centered spaces for our clients if you're not in a space like that yourself. Yeah, I think it's transparent. I don't have an office and I don't have a desk, and I go around and sit with people. What else?
Just one other question. What's the response been like when you have new staff coming into the space?
They tend not to leave. The only people who have left to have a family or to set up their own studios. Nobody's gone to work for someone else so far.
Have you thought about it enough?
Yeah, it's not that hard. Yeah. So we've made a lot of mistakes at the School of Life, which is kind of, I don't know, learning how to live well.
At least we can justify it that way.
How old is it, first of all?
So we launched in 2008, so just after the financial crisis hit. So we're, 7 years old? 7 years old. When we first launched, we had 5 courses, and that was it. It was love, work, family, politics, and play. And the biggest mistake I think that we learned from that was that no man in their right mind was ever going to go on a 10-week course on love. It was just never, ever, ever going to happen, like ever in a million years. And we couldn't work it out for ages. We were like, why? Why? Doesn't everyone need to know about this? And of course, not really thinking about how intimidating and completely ridiculous that would be. One, in the UK, where that's kind of I don't know, you guys are very open and very friendly and very kind of self-aware, but not quite as open and friendly and self-aware as Americans maybe, where it's like gush, gush, gush to strangers. So there's a bit more reserve there. So yeah, getting men in a room to talk about love for 10 weeks in a row was never going to happen. So we basically worked out that it was better for us to break up our courses into kind of one-off sessions and to title them in a way that was very practical and outcome focused. So how to everything. So like how to like make a relationship go better, make love last, whatever, move on from a relationship, communicate better in love, all of that sort of thing, which helped us with the gender balance. But we've still had to work, and we have to listen really carefully to our community around what topics and subjects people really are prepared to chat about and to explore with a group. There are certain subjects that people, I just don't think, want to get that intimate about. So we've never been able to successfully sell out a workshop around sex, for example, even though we've tried. We tend to find that that goes better in book form and online, which is probably not surprising. I guess it would be a little bit awkward, but we're trying.
Which are the ones that sell out first?
So How to Find a Job You Love consistently is the bestseller, hands down, the entire time I've been with the School of Life. We just cannot run that session enough. And then probably we have other sessions which sort of take turns being second and third favorite. So how to realize your potential, how to be more creative, how to communicate better at work. Really heavily focused on, I would say, kind of professional development in the sense that it's personal effectiveness in a work context. I think people are most instantly impacted by like their work relationship. If it doesn't feel good, it affects everything else in your life. Whereas often if you're working a lot, you can kind of ignore what's happening in your personal life because you're so busy working. With work, if it's not going well, you really cannot
stay
ignore
late.
it. Yeah, you stay late or you watch Netflix or whatever it is and you just pretend it's not happening. Work, I mean, that's your earning potential and you have to spend, most of your life with these people. So if it's not going well, it's a problem. So I think that is people's number one priority and the thing that they will spend money on because to fix it and make it go better. So we spend a lot of time thinking about ways that we can support people in that capacity. And relationships are the next one because it's all about we have a lot of pressure, I suppose, on the sort of romantic ideal, the perfect partner who's going to be the one and fulfill like all of our needs and desires and never get boring. And actually that's just total bollocks and I don't think anybody who's married here believes that is the case. You work out pretty quickly that isn't gonna happen. But there's a lot that we can learn about being more mature in love and how to sustain a relationship over time, which isn't about being in love, but about kind of being a loving person and creating a loving environment.
A bit like buildings, actually.
Yeah,
I mean, you actually can't really. It doesn't work with a building to think, give me wow, and then it'll be fine afterwards. You've really got to know how you're going to live in it, how you're going to work in it, how you're going to look after it going forward, because actually that's far more relevant.
It's the maintenance, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the understanding really is how you are going to fit into that building, not necessarily whether the building's going to be wow.
And it's
a
like
distraction.
the little ecosystem that you create, isn't it? It's how you work as a team and how it functions as a little system. So we do a lot of work around work and love. And the other sort of mistakes for us, I guess, have been around money. We kind of thought that if people were anxious about money, that to run classes around worrying less about money would be something that people would kind of get on board with. And actually, I think people, if they're really stressed about money, don't want to talk about how stressed they are about money, at least not with other people. So it's just little interesting kind of insights into what people are prepared to share with strangers and where there still are kind of taboos. And so certainly sex and money are still two of those
it's funny,
areas.
actually. We're working with a company in the US around the money subject. And after a lot of sort of rather maybe optimistic discussions around exciting words like inspiring and empowering and authentic and all of that,
actually, it came down to the fact that really what they needed was a space that was around privacy and comfort, because it's very stressful talking about money.
It is. I think, I mean, yeah, that's kind of what we came across. And then the other sort of hot point for people is family. And so trying to kind of broach issue of like difficult family relationships in a way that doesn't feel like an instant kind of drag or something that brings people down, but where you feel like you can kind of get at a knotty problem and actually make progress. So yeah, there are a couple of real flashpoints, I think.
How far do you find the environment affects how people are prepared to talk about those issues?
Well, I don't know if any of you guys have been to the School of Life, but it's basically designed as a shop that's on a high street with lots of very beautiful, kind of interesting idea kind of related products. And then we have a classroom space in the basement, which has a kind of 360-degree kind of graffiti mural that was designed by an artist called Charlotte Mann. And it's her kind of interpretation of the ideal apartment. So she's basically taken a texter and drawn this kind of amazing mural with the ideal library and kind of vinyl collection and artwork and plants and all of that sort of thing. So it doesn't feel like a kind of traditional classroom. It's much more like a kind of grown-up play space, if that makes sense. And I think the fact that you're not going into an institutional or a recognizably academic or therapeutic environment, but it's designed in a way that is much more kind of creative and appeals to your kind of cultural sensibilities, instantly kind of puts people at ease and helps to kind of foster a just more relaxed and kind of open type of communication. And part of that, I think, is down to the fact that, you know, half an hour before the class starts, we put wine out, we put food out, we try and make people feel relaxed, like they're going over to a friend's house and meeting some interesting people. So we do about half an hour of kind of an icebreaker where people are just encouraged to sort of chat with the other people upstairs in the shop, and then we go downstairs and actually start our session. And the sessions are never kind of sort of lecture, like wholly lecture-based experiences. There's a lot of opportunity to chat with the people around you, to do some self-reflection and other activities. So there's a bit of like physical movement, there's a bit of chatting, there's a bit of listening. It's kind of designed to appeal to lots of different styles of learning. And it's definitely not kind of, you know, lecturer on broadcast mode. It's much more reflective about dialogue. And we find that people really respond very well to that. And it's a very supportive and kind of, it's quite a transformational experience for some people. We get all different kinds of people from all walks of life, different age groups, different professional backgrounds. Some people walk away, you know, deciding to change their job or leave their marriage or start a new business, who have kind of used that as a way to get enough support to make a leap. Other people come in are quite skeptical about it and sort of hang back a bit and just sort of watch what's going on. But I think, you know, at the minimum, it'll be, oh, I hadn't thought about that before, or that's a different way of thinking about it. So it offers perspective, if nothing else. But I think a lot of that is down to the design of the space, and we spend a lot of time thinking about the design of our materials, all of our communications, our websites. The aesthetic kind of qualities of that are very, very important in delivering the message. I think otherwise it wouldn't work. So, yeah.
Very quiet out there. There we go. Lovely.
So I didn't hear much about your story. I was not pronouncing it right, because I look at your work. They're all very, remind me a little bit Japanese, like the aesthetic design, poetic and nature and symbolic, even the way you dress. It's very, honestly, unlike this environment we're in, which is, you know, too much in different ways. So how did you develop this philosophy over the years? What inspired you?
Gosh. I mean, first of all, actually, I always say with the studio that we don't have a style, that we start really with the context and the client and really try to understand why and what before the house. So, you know, the studio's done tons of very diverse projects, from Soho House, which is about as un-Japanese as you can get, I guess, to a project that we're doing in the US, the one I mentioned, which is, you could probably say, is going to be quite natural and exactly the things you've described. So it's really about design which is the right response, or that we consider to be the right response to a situation, to the people, to the future, and one that will live without us, so to speak. I think I come from a totally kind of ragtag background. I never meant to be a designer. It's something that happened absolutely not through planning. I grew up appreciating the power that the environment could have on you. I come from a very big family. We were given terrific freedom, no money, but terrific freedom to make our world. And I saw the power that that had. And also, by contrast, because some pretty rubbish stuff happened where I ended up in bed and breakfast, in hospitals, with my mother, I saw how terrible environments could be and how they really could have such an adverse effect on people. So very early on, I saw how it could be a force for good and a force for great sadness, actually. So I think I started to look at the world like that, and I became a journalist, and I got the opportunity to see literally thousands of environments. I was so influenced, I think, by that, by just seeing thousands. I calculated once, it must have been about 5,000 different environments over my decade as a magazine editor. And I think that, more than anything, informed what I do now. It made me realise how vital it was, really, that spaces were designed around people. And it made me investigate and research and become super curious about architecture, art, behavioural therapy, you know, all the different investigations and research, really, around how space affects you. So that's really, in the end, how I've developed my own thinking, very much with the help of people who've thought before me. And then also through teaching, which of course is the best way of learning. I've been head of man and wellbeing at the Design Academy Eindhoven for 15 years, so that's been hugely inspiring too.
I have another question for Morgwn Rimel. So I look at the website, and actually a friend recommended me. I was actually put off by the titles because they're all about self-help and how to do this, how to do that. I was more, and at the beginning we talked about like styling years of philosophy. So, and I think this is a question maybe for both of you. So what about things that doesn't look straightly useful that I actually implement? Because like for me, the school of life was to spend the life to learn about, and we didn't have time to learn like hardcore, actually hardcore astronomy, which is something I haven't been learning and really, really inspiring. So what do you think of these? And you said immeasurable. Do you think that doesn't look useful? How can we teach them? How can we make things
They're immeasurable, like in a bottom line sense, but they're vital in terms of just being able to get along every day in your life. So the kind of skills that we're teaching are about like how to get up in the morning and not feel depressed about going to your job, like how to get along with your partner and not like just fight with them every evening because you're not getting what you want from them, how to appreciate where you've come from and the difficulties that your parents might have faced in raising you and what that means for you as a child, as a parent in the future, as a partner, how that influenced your psychology. I mean, these are things which we say are immeasurable or less important or soft in a way, but they're absolutely essential to who we are as human beings. And actually, it's a travesty that we are not taught more about those things in traditional institutions because we struggle without that kind of help and insight. That's why the self-help industry is so massive and why actually it's kind of distressing that so much money is generated in a space that lacks so much intellectual rigor. And that's part of why we're really working hard to take the best bits of academia and really hard research and bring that to the softer questions, like backing it up with proper research. So we look, psychoanalysis, philosophy, neuroscience, literature, the visual arts. We're not looking at sort of trendy, what's cool now, top 5 tips for, being more productive. It's stuff that is has been around for thousands of years. It's the deeper stuff, which I think in many ways people just think, oh, well, you should just kind of know that, or you somehow absorb it by osmosis.
And also it's not immeasurable in the sense, if you look at the statistics around mental health. Loneliness is the biggest killer of people of all ages. More teenagers die because of suicide than because of drugs or any of the other things that you read about in the press.
And stress.
1 in 6 people have mental health issues. That's because we're so out of touch with the immeasurables, and because from 5 onwards we're only measured through those measurable things. Our education system is so focused on success and achievement.
And we're so much more successful than we ever have been. We have more money, more comfortable lives than we ever have been, yet we're the least happy that we've ever been. And we're all experiencing incredibly high degrees of stress. We feel fragmented, confused, muddled. There are reasons why that's happening. And technology, where it's a great enabler and where it's a wonderfully democratic tool for empowering people and giving them access to information that previously would have been held for a very elite few, also means that we have in some ways eroded our three-dimensional relationships with the people around us. It's eroded our attention spans to some degree, and we do in many ways have shallower brains, which means that we have to find ways and develop other skills to recapture some of that depth and ability to reflect on who we are and how we connect with other people.
And cultures that have worked out systems for that, either by luck or judgment, do seem to manage better. To use the Danes as an example, but the Colombians do well too. Hygge, which is basically in English translated as coziness, but actually that's not what it means. It means sort of well-being, but it's really a code of small behaviours, just the tiny things that you do around daily detail, around the ordinary things, the small things that matter, that basically build the fabric of life, of human interaction. They put so much care and attention into those details. And I think the result is a much more connected society, because at a very basic level, there's a focus on that, from the candle that's lit in the morning through to certain ways, etiquettes of behaving. They're taken seriously.
I think it's that sense of groundedness, but also attentiveness and focus. So attention to detail as opposed to just complete distraction. So Ilse works a lot with that idea of well-being, and we work a lot with a Greek kind of idea of well-being called eudaimonia, which I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with, the idea that there's a hierarchy of needs, and we are fortunate enough to live in a culture where most of our immediate physical needs are very well catered for. And we are dealing more with first world problems. It sort of sounds like a joke, but actually it's a real thing that people should take very seriously. We have different sets of problems than people in the developing world, and they are much more around our psychological needs and confusions and anxieties. And the School of Life is about helping people to learn how to flourish, and that means by coming to terms with our emotional needs, learning how to kind of cope with our anxieties and to kind of quell some of the psychological sort of issues that pop up, and to focus on this idea of well-being and self-actualization, which means not only are we healthy, are we wealthy in the sense that we have the immediate things that we need, but that we are emotionally sound and comfortable and happy to some degree. And that the actions that we take in our lives are geared towards sustaining that and in a way, are about being the best possible version of yourself. So they talk a lot about virtue in kind of Greek philosophy, which sounds kind of very do-goodish, but actually is quite a noble thing. And we could probably do with talking more about those kinds of words instead of just fame and fortune, but being good and being kind and showing compassion. Sort of old-fashioned virtues, I think we could probably do more with emphasizing today.
I'm curious about the man whose favorite room was his bathroom. Besides amazing water pressure, what did he find in his bathroom that was so special, and what do you think was missing in the rest of his personal environment?
It's a good question. I think that bathing is one of those most primal human activities. It's really where we are one with ourselves, and many cultures have huge attention to bathing for a lot of reasons, mostly connected to the industry of hygiene. We lost that somewhere in the 19th century, and bathrooms became cold and in some way sinful. So I think that actually it's entirely natural, and bathing is something that we should pay more attention to. It's time to get yourself together mentally as well as physically. It's not a quick scrub. And I think it's a huge pity that we've lost that tradition. If you look at Finland, if you look at Japan, if you look at the hammam, the Turkish bath, they're places of great pleasure. The US,
also,
of course,
I have all
Colorado.
my best ideas in the shower, like easily, like without question, all my best ideas.
So probably it was the one place where he could feel himself, and apart from his machine.
Yeah, relaxed, kind of private spaces.
Anyone else like to add a question? Here we go.
Just, hi, I'm Jen. Nice to meet you guys. Getting back to well-being, you both are clearly very successful people. I'm kind of trying to be successful. That means working really hard. I'm sure you both work very, very hard. But I'm wondering at what point you draw a line and make time to look after your personal well-being. What do you do to look after your own well-being to make sure that you are, I guess, successful?
I wouldn't necessarily put those two quite as a cause and effect, I think. She can go first. She swims.
Yeah, okay, that's true, I do. I'm not always very good at looking after myself, but when I am good at looking after myself, it's basically my mental health, so some kind of meditation or yoga, because it helps me to focus and to kind of just clear out the noise, and exercise. Like, I need to be outside in nature and physically active. I feel like I have a very intense, I'm quite a serious person, so I need to have a physical release to be able to kind of calm down and like chill out a bit. Otherwise, I'm just like too focused, like hyper focused. And of course, getting away from my iPhone and turning off the computer.
So do you like have a cutoff point where you?
I'm supposed to have a cutoff point, which my husband tries to enforce, which then I kind of rebel against. I'm like, you can't tell me to get off my phone, and I'm going to stay on. But yeah, it's so immature, it's ridiculous. And it's so unhealthy to be sitting there with a blue screen in front of your face at like 11 o'clock at night when you know that that's waking you up more. But yeah, in theory, you should really have a kind of cutoff point and just put the office sort of away. But I don't know, for me it's less about work and more about my relationship to the city, and just being very conscious of the fact that I need time away from London and time to be outside with fresh air and in nature and just away from the hustle and bustle. So I do a lot of open water swimming and take trips to kind of get back to the ocean.
I find it quite tough in London, to be honest. But going back to the sort of basic ideas of well-being, I think to be connected to other people. I mean, I don't separate work and my private life. Probably I should do it more, but really for me, it is about learning. It is about being with other people, being connected to other people. I'm so lucky to be doing a job that is actually what I care about most in life. So apart from the moments when I just get too tired to talk, mostly what I do is what gives me my well-being. Physical activity, though, for sure. And I think, the Greeks weren't wrong when they said you should do both. I've been reading this book recently, which basically says that as you get older, you should actually exercise more, not less. A slightly horrific 1 hour a day, every day. But either way, I think the key is certainly being socially connected, being with other people, and being active and learning. I think those are the fundamentals.
I think that point about learning is a really good one. Just kind of consistently trying to remain curious and open to new ideas, and kind of putting yourself out of your comfort zone as well, really, really helps. The worst case scenario is when you think you kind of know everything, and then you just sort of become more rigid in your thinking and limit your exposure to new ideas and new people and new places.
But I'm also married to a man who cooks very well, so that helps.
So he's looking after you. Yeah, good.
Oh, it feels painful to interrupt a good conversation, but indeed we're in a conducive environment for more conversation, and maybe we can talk about, I don't know, love, money, and sex around the bar. But in the meantime, please thank both of our guests so much for coming. You're welcome to stay here for as long as you want, so please convene at the bar. Thank you so much.